I pulled into my parents' driveway just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn that used to be my summer chore. The house looked exactly the same, like time had politely paused at the front door. The porch railing still leaned slightly to the left, the windows framed by the same snow-dusted evergreen wreaths my mom pulled out every December. A glowing reindeer, half-lit, blinked feebly in the yard. It was all familiar, painfully so. I sat in the car for a moment longer than I needed to, my hands gripping the steering wheel even after the engine had gone quiet. The weight in my chest wasn't exactly dread. Not yet, but something adjacent. The kind of heaviness that comes when you're about to walk into a space filled with love that's grown conditional. It had been almost 6 weeks since I moved out. Not in a dramatic, slamming door kind of way. Just quietly. I packed a few bags and started sleeping at my friend Maya's apartment on the other side of town. At first I told myself it was temporary, a mental reset. But the more time passed, the more I realized how much lighter I felt being away from the house, and everything it had come to represent. My parents didn't ask many questions when I left. If they noticed my absence at all, they didn't mention it. They just assumed I was busy, the way I've always been. The capable daughter. The one who figures things out without help. I stepped out of the car and inhaled the cold air. It smelled like pine and chimney smoke, like every December of my childhood. A flicker of nostalgia threatened to soften me, but I held it back. This wasn't the home I remembered. Not anymore. Inside, I could already hear the muffled sound of laughter, the clink of dishes, the swell of Christmas music. I imagined my sister was already there, probably draped across the living room couch like she owned it. Maybe she did now. Maybe we both did. Or neither of us. It was hard to tell these days. I grabbed the pie I'd brought, store-bought, but no one would ask, and walked up the steps. As I rang the doorbell, I felt it again. That tangle of hope and hesitation. The sense that tonight, something long buried might rise to the surface. Last Christmas started with so much promise. The fire crackled in the hearth, cinnamon rolls cooled on the counter, and the smell of pine filled every corner of the house. My parents were in high spirits. Mom bustling in and out of the kitchen, Dad grinning like he knew something the rest of us didn't. My sister, Lila, was curled up under a blanket by the tree, scrolling through her phone and humming along to the Christmas playlist Dad insisted on playing every year. Then came the gifts. They saved mine for last, a large white envelope tucked beneath the tree, too plain to mean much. I opened it, expecting something simple, a travel voucher maybe or tickets to a concert. But when I unfolded the letter inside, my breath caught. It was a property deed. My name was on it. My mom beamed. "It's the house on Amber Lane. We got it for you." I blinked stunned. "You bought me a house." "Well," Dad laughed, rubbing the back of his neck, "technically, you'll still have to finish paying it off. We just got it started for you." My heart sank a little as I flipped through the rest of the packet. Mortgage papers, payment schedules, and insurance breakdown. A house, yes, but also years of debt, responsibility, and pressure. I did the math in my head and realized they'd only covered the down payment. The rest was on me. Still, I smiled. What else could I do? "Wow. Thank you," I said, though it felt more like a question than a celebration. Lila clapped half-heartedly from the couch. "That's so adult," she said, almost teasing. "Guess you're really grown up now." Later that day, when Lila opened her own big surprise, it was another envelope, but inside was a title to a condo across town, already paid off. No strings. No payments. No stress. I remember how she squealed, jumping up and down like we were 12 again. My parents laughed along, proudly telling her how they wanted her to have a fresh start. That she deserved something special. I smiled too, but I felt something shift inside me, like the floor beneath my feet had tilted just slightly off balance. I spent that night lying awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize it. I'd always been the responsible one, the saver, planner, the one who never asked for anything. Maybe that's why they thought I could handle a mortgage while my sister got a gift with no strings attached. "You've saved enough," Dad had said later when I asked him why the two gifts were so different. You're good with money. It made more sense for you to build equity. And Lila? Yes. Mom just smiled and gave that shrug she always gave when something felt unfair but unchangeable. She's still figuring things out. I didn't argue. I never did. I told myself I was lucky. House is a house. They didn't have to give me anything. They could have done nothing at all. And yet, even as I signed the first payment check a few weeks later, something in me ached. Gratitude and betrayal fought for space in my chest. I tried to be thankful, to see it as an opportunity. But deep down, it felt like I'd inherited a burden disguised as generosity, while my sister was handed freedom wrapped in a bow. That was the beginning of the quiet distance. Not just from the house, but from them. The first few weeks in the house were quiet. Too quiet. It was a modest 2-bedroom near the edge of town, freshly painted but already showing signs of wear. Chipped baseboards, a leaky faucet, a furnace that rattled like it had something to say. I told myself I could handle it. I was a homeowner now, after all. I watched YouTube tutorials on minor plumbing, patched up drywall with clumsy pride, and tried to ignore how loud the silence felt in the evenings. The mortgage payments hit harder than I expected. Not because I hadn't budgeted, I had. But there was something different about watching your savings slowly shrink while your sister was posting brunch selfies from the balcony of a fully paid condo. The weight of responsibility they handed me began to settle in my bones. And then, one afternoon in March, Lila showed up with 2 suitcases and a sheepish smile. Just for a few weeks, she said, while they fixed the plumbing at my place. You've got the space, right? Of course I had the space. But I didn't remember being asked. She took the 2nd bedroom, dumped her clothes across the bed, and filled the bathroom with curling irons and scented lotions. Weeks turned into a month. Then another. Her plumbing issue mysteriously stretched on, and no one seemed eager to follow up. My parents, when I brought it up, waved it off. She's just going through a lot, Mom said. Be patient. It's good for both of you, Dad added. You're sisters, you should be close. Close. That word landed like a stone in my gut. Lila didn't pay rent. Or utilities. She didn't contribute to groceries or help with chores. She came and went as she pleased, sometimes inviting friends over without notice, leaving behind messes and half-finished wine bottles. When I finally asked her to pitch in for the electric bill, she laughed. You're already paying for everything anyway. Why complicate it? I started venting to Maya, my closest friend since college. Are you hearing yourself? She said one night over takeout. You're basically subsidizing her lifestyle. And your parents are letting it happen. I hated that she was right. But admitting it made me feel weak, like I'd failed some test of maturity or kindness. After all, wasn't this what being responsible meant? Shouldering more, saying less. Eventually, I started spending more time at Maya's place. At first just for a night or two, then longer stretches. I told Lila I had late work nights. I told my parents I was staying with a friend while the furnace got fixed again. But the truth was, I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I'd started to resent the creak of the stairs, the clatter of Lila's shoes in the entryway, the constant reminder that I was living in a home that didn't feel like mine. My name was on the mortgage, but I felt like a guest. And every time I visited my parents, they still called it the girls' house, like we were playing house instead of sinking under it. I realized then, they didn't see me as an adult, just a placeholder. Someone to keep things functioning while Lila figured things out. But I was figuring something out too. I just hadn't told them yet. I didn't plan to leave the house. Not really. Started with a bag. Then a few more. A week of crashing at Maya's turned into 2, then a month. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back once I cleared my head. But the longer I stayed away, the less I wanted to return. There was no big announcement. No dramatic exit. I just stopped going back. Lila didn't say much when I stopped sleeping there. If she noticed I was gone more than usual, she didn't let on. When I texted to check in, she responded with casual updates. Thanks for the rent reminder, I'll send it eventually. Or, left some laundry in the dryer, hope that's cool. She didn't ask where I was staying and I didn't offer. I doubt she even missed my presence. Only my maintenance. The house felt like a wound I didn't want to press on anymore. Every time I thought about walking through that door, I felt an ache in my chest. So I stopped thinking about it. I let the auto payments handle the mortgage. I ignored the HOA letters that showed up in my inbox. I let the silence grow around me like insulation. When I called my parents, they didn't ask questions either. They assumed I was busy, the default excuse for anything they didn't want to dig into. Once my mom joked on the phone, "You and your sister living together, just like old times." I smiled, even though my stomach twisted. They didn't know I hadn't stepped foot in that house in over a month. At Maya's I felt lighter, even if it was borrowed space. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of comfort that didn't expect anything in return. We ordered takeout, watched dumb shows, and laughed like I hadn't in months. It wasn't mine, but it was safe. Still, the guilt lingered. It curled in my chest late at night, whispering questions I couldn't answer. Was I abandoning responsibility? Was I being selfish? Ungrateful? I'd been raised to be the strong one, the stable one, the daughter who didn't need much. But lately I'd started to wonder what it might feel like to need something and say it out loud. To need fairness. To need boundaries. To need to be seen. Not just as a utility, not just as the responsible one, but as someone worthy of real care. I kept waiting for my parents to call, to ask where I'd been. They didn't. I waited for my sister to notice I was gone. They didn't. And in that silence, something inside me began to shift. Not bitterness. Not yet. But something colder. Something close to clarity. The dining room was glowing in soft candlelight, the air thick with roasted garlic, cinnamon, and the hum of overlapping conversations. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware scraped plates, and Bing Crosby played low in the background like a distant memory. If you squinted, it looked like a picture-perfect holiday. But under the warmth and sparkle, something quieter pulsed, something offbeat and unspoken. I sat between Lila and my grandfather, who was wearing his usual ugly Christmas sweater, the one with a reindeer whose nose lit up whenever he laughed, which was often. My parents were across from us, sharing inside jokes and passing the sweet potatoes like any other year. Should have felt familiar. But I felt like a guest again. Lila was scrolling through her phone under the table. My parents, as usual, were doting over her, asking about her job, her friends, her plans for New Year's. No one had asked me much of anything. I picked at my food, offering polite smiles when prompted, doing my best to blend into the setting. Then Grandpa, between bites of turkey and mashed potatoes, turned to me and grinned. "So, kiddo," he said, cheerful and oblivious. "How's life in the house I bought you?" Everything stopped. Forks froze mid-air. The laughter died like a candle snuffed out. Across the table, my mother's smile faltered. My father's face twitched, then smoothed into practiced calm. Lila let out a sharp little cough and turned her head. I stared at Grandpa, his eyes twinkling like he'd just delivered a heartwarming punchline. And for a moment I couldn't speak. My pulse pounded in my ears. Could have let it slide. I could have smiled and lied and moved on like I always did. But something in me cracked, softly then completely. "I haven't lived there in weeks," I said, my voice calm, too calm. "Lila's been staying there. I've been living with a friend." The silence deepened. Grandpa's smile wavered. "Wait, what do you mean? That house is yours. I gave your parents the money to buy it for you. Full cash. No mortgage. Didn't they?" He trailed off, turning to my parents, confusion knitting his brow. We used that money for the down payment on Lila's condo," my dad said quickly. "It made more sense at the time. She needed the help." My mom jumped in, her voice a little too bright. "And we thought giving you the other house with a manageable mortgage was fair. You're better with finances." My mouth went dry. I felt every muscle in my body tense. "So," Grandpa said slowly, turning to me again, "they used the money I gave them for you to buy your sister's home?" No one answered. The silence was louder than any confession. Grandpa looked stunned. That was supposed to be your gift. I wanted you to have a house, no strings. That's what I told them. I felt like I was underwater, the world moving around me in muffled waves. Lila still hadn't said a word. Her eyes stayed locked on her plate. I've been paying the mortgage on a house I don't even live in anymore, I said, not accusing, just numb. I thought I was being responsible. I thought I should be grateful. But it wasn't a gift. Not to me. My father exhaled. We didn't think it would matter. You're stable. You can handle it. I didn't ask to handle it, I said quietly. I never asked for any of this. Grandpa looked heartbroken. He reached for my hand. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I had no idea. I nodded, but the lump in my throat was too thick to speak. Across the table, my mother dabbed her mouth with a napkin, pretending to be composed. My father reached for his wine. Lila finally looked up, her voice small. I didn't know that money was meant for her. I believed her. And somehow that made it worse. The rest of dinner passed in awkward sips and forced small talk. The air never quite recovered. My appetite was gone. I sat there thinking about how long I'd accepted things that didn't make sense. How often I'd told myself that silence was maturity, that swallowing disappointment was love. But that night something shifted. I saw my family clearly for the first time in years, not as the people I wanted them to be, but as the people they were. And I realized I didn't have to play along anymore. It didn't take long for the tension to shatter the room. We hadn't even cleared the dessert plates before the arguing began. I can't believe you lied to me, Grandpa said, his voice shaking, not with age but fury. I gave you that money for her. I made it clear. We didn't lie, my dad insisted, his tone defensive, clipped. We made a decision that benefited both our daughters. Benefited, I said, my voice rising before I could stop it. You gave her a home. You gave me debt. Mom reached for my arm. Sweetheart, you've always been so independent. You didn't need the same kind of help. But I deserved it just the same, I snapped. I deserved honesty. I deserved the chance to say no. Lila finally looked up, eyes wide, voice small. I didn't know it was supposed to be yours. I thought she paused, then sighed. I thought it was fair. You thought it was fair, I said, disbelief cutting through me. You moved into my house without paying a dime. You let me cover everything while you lived rent-free. And you thought that was fair. She looked away, lips tight. You used my stability against me, I said, turning to my parents. You assumed I'd just take it. Smile through it. Handle it. You've always been the responsible one, my mother whispered. As if that explained everything. I felt something inside me collapse. But not in the way it used to, where the pain would fold inward and settle like a stone in my gut. No, this collapse felt like a release. Like the weight of years finally sliding off my shoulders. I'm done, I said, standing up from the table. Don't be dramatic, Dad muttered. But I was already walking. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door. No one followed. Behind me, Grandpa said something low and sharp, but I didn't stay to hear it. I stepped out into the cold, the night air slapping me awake. My breath came in short bursts as I walked to my car, heart pounding, hands shaking. I wasn't sure if I was angry or heartbroken or both. Everything I had shoved down for years, every quiet compromise, every swallowed frustration, had boiled over in the span of minutes. But underneath the grief, something else bloomed. Liberation. For so long, I'd been clinging to the version of family I wanted to believe in. Tonight I saw the truth. And painful as it was also freeing. I didn't need to prove my worth through sacrifice. I didn't have to earn love by carrying more than my share. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the house I once called home, and realized I wasn't walking away empty. I was finally choosing myself. Weeks passed. The snow that had blanketed Christmas had melted into gray slush by the time I officially signed the paperwork. I stood outside the small brick house one last time, keys in hand, staring up at the windows where lights still twinkled faintly from Lila's haphazard decorating. My name was coming off the deed. The mortgage was being refinanced under my parents. They resisted at first, of course, called it unnecessary, dramatic, selfish. But I was done with being talked out of my own boundaries. I told them I was removing myself from the house because I didn't trust them with my future anymore. And I meant it. They didn't apologize. Not really. My dad shrugged, my mom cried a little, and Lila sent a vague hope things work out text that I never responded to. Letting go of the house felt like shedding skin I'd outgrown. It wasn't a loss. It was a release. I moved into a sunlit apartment across the city. Small, quiet, and entirely mine. No one had picked it for me. No one had keys but me. The first night there, I sat cross-legged on the floor eating takeout straight from the container, surrounded by unopened boxes and peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to disappoint me. A few days after I settled in, Grandpa showed up with a plant and a warm hug. He didn't say much at first, just walked around the space, nodding approvingly, then sat down at the little table I'd borrowed from Maya. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "Not for moving out, but for standing up." I looked at him, eyes misting. "You didn't deserve to be misled either." "No," he said, "but you were the one they put the weight on. And you didn't just carry it. You knew when to put it down. That takes strength." He left me with an envelope, some money to help with a security deposit, and a note that simply read, "This time no strings." It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen. Since then I've learned to take up space. I say no without apology. I answer texts when I want to. I speak when I'm ready, not when I'm pressured. I've stopped trying to explain my choices to people who only want me quiet and compliant. My family hasn't changed. Maybe they never will. But I have. And that's enough. I still see Grandpa often. He comes over with pastries and stories, filling the apartment with the kind of love that doesn't demand anything in return. I'm building something new here, something rooted in honesty and care, even if it's quieter and smaller than what I used to imagine. Sometimes late at night I still replay that Christmas dinner in my mind. The silence, the question, the unraveling. The truth I'd always suspected, spoken out loud at last. And now, when I think of that moment, I don't feel pain. Feel clarity. Because sometimes it takes one question to uncover what you've always known, and to finally choose yourself.